Hi, Jackie
Hello.
and Gabe and I are back for our third conversation. We have these on a weekly basis so that we can expose the progression of thought and capacity of what happens when we engage around ideas as accurately as we can and see them as things that aren't contestable, but if they simply exist, begin to concede the existence of them rather than try and preoccupy our discussion with thoughts trying to prove or disprove the reality or the truth of any of them, but simply begin to look at the basis of the basis as saying it's the basis. It's just a functional reality that is real and it's true and it's absolute and it doesn't change or veer when I think it does. And when I feel it does, what I'm feeling is what I'm thinking. It isn't doing it to me on some global universal level. I simply tend to blame the universe for what I'm unwilling to admit I'm doing. And that's largely what we're talking about in this conversation. And a couple of the points before opening up that were left from last week, Jackie was talking about walking the walk, practicing being as being peace, which is being the change I want to see effectively, I think were your words, Jackie. And then always having everything needed, beginning to just come to terms with that in every given moment, it seems to be sufficient to survive the given moment and not needing to be needed, realizing that if there is a ultimate place that we all occupy, we don't need anything from anybody, and yet we have everything everyone has at the same time. Gabe focused on conceding, which is a concession, the idea versus surrender, and giving up a fight is to begin to see that if the only fight there is one I think I'm having with something that doesn't exist, the only thing I'm fighting is in fact a thought. And his question about how do you carry this message? How do you convey this to other people who are perhaps reactive and doing the things that I did and we did to keep from seeing what we know and what we share in common? And then how to see others are actually more than we think and start to concede that into our witness of them and our observation of them and our experience of them. So those are a few of the dangling chads from the last ballot and threads that we've carried along that are a little bit of a basis for discussion. And obviously they will lead wherever we go. So good morning to you both, to anyone listening, good whatever time of day it is. And hello, Jackie and Gabe.
Morning, Jack.
Good morning.
So other than everything, what's happening?
Well, I am doing my best to implement these ideas, and I've been having really wonderful responses with them. So I am seeing what I want to see in the world. Like things are definitely, I'm surrounded by people with like-minded thinking and not with trying to make that happen. It's just naturally happening and really letting go. I didn't know that I was needing to be needed. I wouldn't have ever thought that, but letting go of that, it's unbelievable to like, it's cleared up so much time in my thinking for creativity versus trying to be heroes to everybody in my life. Like this person needs to hear this person needs to hear that. I'm like, I don't need to be needed by them. They can ask me when they want to know something, because otherwise I'm trying to play God in their lives.
And freedom is never needed if it's all we have.
Right.
It just is.
Right.
It's just a basic state of existence. And to turn it into something that's up to us, once again, claims worthy victors of claiming need and claiming freedom as our source to even be able to have the potential to be able to think that it's up to us to do it for others when they must also be free as we are.
Right.
And seeing it that way, it's, and I think you said it, and starting to see more in people is beginning to see people. If we share the same thing, then the more is already there. And all that limits it is what we think rather than it has ever been limited. It can't be limited. All that's limited is what we think. And if all we're relying on is what we think about things, that's a pretty narrow view of humanity and life, and a pretty shallow attempt at actually conveying this thing we claim is our job, when in fact what we're doing is reinforcing ideas that are not true.
Right. And thinking that it wasn't shallow. Really believing that none of it was shallow, that it was the opposite, and then letting go of needing to be needed, you realize how shallow it really is.
Well, and what's funny is the depths we go to pretend it's shallow.
Right, exactly.
It's sort of a sick irony, because it seems like we're reaching into this vast darkness and really coming up with all the stops and becoming this sort of mythical hero. And all that we're doing is basically delusional. I mean, it's just a self-serving idea of.
It's just patting ourselves on the shoulder.
Yeah,
thinking that we're so deep, that I'm so deep.
It's reinforcing the idea. Well, and that what people often say is that truth is deep. And sometimes when this conversation begins, people say, oh, that's really deep. And I say, where you're seeing it from is a pile of shit. And so what you're seeing looks deep. But the idea that truth could be deep is, again, the reinforcement that truth isn't accessible, and it isn't available, and it isn't ours, and it's always somewhere else. And wherever we go, we never find it. So we have to keep looking. And we're on this desperate, endless search. Rather than conceding, it's always been a lot of the guys I worked with early on. I said, you remember the old Pirates thing about X marks the spot on the map? Consider it's tattooed on the bottom of your feet. And wherever you go, it's there. Every step you take.
Let's go get them. Let's get a team X on our feet. That would hurt so much. Also, I've been doing, I have what I need when I need it.
Yes.
So, I never need anything. I can trust that, truth is, like you said, truth is available at all times. It never stops being available. So is everything I need, is always right here in the moment.
Well, and what's interesting is acting like it's not creates its own sense of fear. So the actions that come out of that internal fear tend to be dysfunctional and end up not getting us the things that we do actually need, like the next breath. And it's interesting, there's no animal on the planet that has breathwork classes to teach people how to breathe. We have been breathing so shallow because our own experience is, people say that's really breathtaking. And I say, no, death is breathtaking. When we're actually breathing deep, we call it breathtaking. That's another oddity of language. And a deep breath is actually complementary to the body's ability to function. It's part of our design. So when we're breathing shallow, we're really replicating this, almost trying to be non-existent and trying not to be noticed and trying not to draw attention and trying to pretend that we're really not here because we're really trying to be invisible while we're claiming everything we see in the world is perfectly clear. And that's a bit of a lopsided view. And I may say those things in absolute terms to make the point, and there's a lot of gray in between how people do that.
Well, I think, Jack, that I'd like to take a step back, and whoever's in the, within the sound of my voice can hopefully relate, is that for decades, I created a false truth or my own truth and perpetuated it in every aspect I could, and spent, thousands of dollars on CBT, decades in therapy, medication, all of these things. And really the thinking was the root of it all. And once I came to sort of understand that, even on a tertiary, or secondary level, things start to change rather quickly. And, knowing the truth and lying about the truth have been, potholes in my path here that I've been trying to avoid of late, but always for the last many decades. And so at least I can see a pothole. And we talked recently about, living in the doubt, living that, you may not be the purveyor of truth, even if that's the doubt you have, is something to sit with and sit in. And I think that's been a great thing this past week for me, as I had some mild fear last week that was completely fabricated by myself. So it's been a great journey to know that it's all within here. So I appreciate that.
And something that we might mention is that we have a weekly discussion that we have 10 to 12 people on a pretty regular basis come to, and that have really developed this discussion. So some of the interlude between our discussions are filled with a conversation that's gone as long as 5 hours on a Sunday morning. And we let it go as long as anyone's interested in talking. And typically the sense of time is completely lost because the focus is so engaging that people lose sense. Like they say, time flies when you're having fun. There's a sense of fullness in the process, so that the whole sense of time seems to dissipate. Nobody seems to get tired. Some people leave because they need to go somewhere. They've got some sort of a schedule to maintain. But it's an interesting phenomenon to watch that occur. And the meeting the discussion set for an hour and a half, and it's gone as long as 4 hours and 40 minutes, including a gentleman that I mentioned who came for the first time and had never been exposed to sobriety at all, but had given up drinking and had found that he really had that mental issue that he could not seem to stop. And he stayed for 4 hours and 40 minutes the first time and has come back every time. So I don't say that as a claim to absolute success, but that the engagement around these ideas are engaging enough to keep attention focused without distraction and without ADD interfering and all of the other sort of anxious disorders that tend to be commonly keeping people from actually experiencing and witnessing what is happening. So, and I love your potholes in your past. The other thing about therapy and medication is that neither of those things are wrong. But if what we're doing is looking in the wrong direction by utilizing them and missing the point that we're creating the problems we're trying to solve, it doesn't matter how long and how far and how much you go. It's just the same as addiction. You can drink forever and you're not going to fix the problem. While you may feel better, but the fact is, in my experience, when I drank too much, I didn't feel better at all. I felt sick to my stomach. And what I've noticed in this process of awareness is that my stomach often feels queasy. I have gut feelings that don't feel good all the time, and they are indicators of something, as far as I can tell, that I'm toxically engaged in. And to the point about doubt, Gabe, that you apparently took away from Sunday's meeting, sensing that doubt is an accurate sensation of something I'm doing, not something. If it's doubtful in my environment and I doubt what I'm doing, the chance of me picking up what's doubtful in my environment would be pretty rare. It would be one chance in as many as possible, because it would just be a crapshoot, like roulette. It's just a complete gamble as to whether or not I'm right in my assessment. If I'm wrong enough to deny what I'm doing that's causing doubt, there's a good chance all the doubt I see out in the world has nothing to do with the world, but everything to do with how I'm seeing the world and thinking of the world. And so that includes all those people I come across that I'm pretty sure I know what's wrong with, while at the same time I have my own level of doubt and uncertainty. It's a pretty good indication that I'm using them to get perspective on what I'm thinking, just like problems, just like feelings. They're all opportunities to say, if I'm witnessing this accurately and just letting it be what it is, then it's giving me information that's accurate. But if I want to maintain the fear and deny it, I'm going to see that information as something to run from and something to get away from. And that's what compulsions are. The attempt to be so preoccupied with something that I say I can't stop doing, when in fact it's only a distraction that I'm giving all of my attention to that's keeping me from admitting what the source of the problem is. And so that cycle is really repetitive. When I'm reacting to a reaction, I create this internal dialogue that just keeps going and going and going and going and going. It's like a computer that's trying to reboot a program, and the computer needs to be rebooted. Those programs will just, you ever have the rainbow just spin on the computer?
Yeah.
And what you need to do is close the program and start it over again. Like actually just say, okay, it's obviously something's wrong in the workings, and this is a restart. Every moment, every present state of moments, which to me is a singularity. It isn't something that's ever divisible. It's always ever present, and it's not present in time. It's so immediate that there's no limit to the minimization or infinitesimal state of that present moment. So it isn't a second and it isn't 10 seconds, because that has a beginning or end. This is an ever-present state of absolute awareness. And we're interconnected to everything that exists, whether it be visible or invisible, whether it be superficial or substantive, seen or not seen. The seeing of the mind, the knowing of the mind, is a seeing that does not require eyes. And the visibility of the eyes, ironically, if eyes were speaking for themselves and using the claim that seeing is believing, then eyes couldn't believe they could see, because they can't even see themselves. So even in our body and in our experience, we have metaphoric examples of this thing that we do in our brain. And yet think, because it's happening out of sight in a sense, and that we're constantly trying to come to terms with what's happening, that what's really happening isn't what's happening, and what is happening isn't happening. And all of a sudden we think what we have is what we think, and as a result actually don't have anything but what we think, and then run into all kinds of problems to start to warrant the thinking is correct, because we blame the problems and the pain and the struggle, rather than say, no, these are manifestations of my own preoccupation with thoughts. Because the problems become challenges and opportunities, rather than something that is a dilemma that seems impossible to resolve. The impossibilities in the initiation of those thoughts, and the constant feeding of them through the reaction of not wanting things as they are, thinking they should be otherwise, and trying then to change them into what we think they should be, rather than conceding, if we don't have them as they are, what we're changing them into is more of what we don't want. And that's just another level of insanity.
If you could boil everything down to one, like, I feel like, as you said, how it's all rebooting, that we're saying the same thing trillion different ways. Yes. Every time, but yes. It's still so engaging for 5 hours at a time, because it's beautiful relief. It's like a video game for our brains.
It's really yoga for the brain, and it's a subtle exercise. You know, I took a Pilates class with a woman named Mimi, who's a master at the body, anatomy, and all that. And she said, if you try to ask a muscle to stretch further than it's ready to stretch, it will fight back. And I started saying, everything you're describing about the way the body works is exactly the way the brain works. And she started seeing it from the mental side, and I was starting to see it from the physical side, the body side. And anatomically, if you ask a muscle to stretch, rather than just give it a little bit of room and start to ask it to go where it willingly goes, when we ask ourselves to begin to entertain ideas that are so absurd and insane, we just become this reactive, a reactor, literally like a nuclear reactor, and have meltdowns, which we call nervous breakdowns. It's the exact same thing that what happens in a reactor when it gets out of control is that there's no possibility of maintaining this reactive, explosive event that's going on inside that 15 feet of concrete that's trying to contain it. And in Chernobyl, that whole thing melted down, and we talk about having meltdowns. It's the exact same thing. We think we can control it. We think the mastery of life is managing it, rather than starting to see that there's no reason to manage anything that's untrue. Absolutely no reason at all, except the irrational reason that it's the only thing we can do, and that's addiction. But you're right, Jackie, the words, while they're constantly focused on the exact same thing, because you're seeing that the singularity of the presence, or not even singularity, because it suggests there would be nothing or something, it's something that is impossible to contain in words. And yet if you point the direction and let people consider what they're seeing, they'll start admitting they also have that same sense of knowing.
Right.
So it shows that words are literally, Oliver Wendell Holmes, I think, said words are the skin of ideas.
Right.
That's all they are. And it's a thin skin. It's a transparent skin, literally a transparent. And they are not solid. They are vaporous. They are see-through. And to make believe that they are solid and absolute and fixed is to create an experience that makes changing them seem impossible. And that's all just a perpetuation of what reaction does to a reaction to a reaction to a reaction. We are repulsed naturally by lying because we are honest naturally in truth.
I was thinking, when I hang out with my mother, if she doesn't say one word, I love the energy of mother-daughter, but every word she says, I'm just like, not every word, but it just made me think of, my mother left me home alone when I was 3, and she still stands by that. I'll point out other 3-year-olds and be like, Mom, would you let this 3-year-old be home alone? Or a 6-year-old? And she's like, no, never. She's like, and she stands by that I was smarter than any of these children. So that she will not concede that that it was not okay to leave me home alone when I was 3.
Well, but it seems to have worked.
I mean, I am here, right?
Yeah,
and my ex said, Jackie, probably it's really good that you were so neglected because you didn't pick up their personalities, their traits, as much as I would have because I was alone for so much.
So how close to the quick do you want to get on this?
What?
How close to the quick do you want to get on this?
Ooh, quick, close.
Okay. You know what the quick is?
What?
In a dog, it's the cuticle. It's like when you start cutting beyond the nail where you're starting to get into the...
Oh, shoot. Yeah, I don't want to cut into there.
Okay, well, let's just go on the nail. My experience is that when abuse stops and we hold the person who abused us responsible, we become the abuser for all the time we think. When they stop doing what they're doing and we continue, we become the abuser.
Well, what about, I've gone through so much forgiveness and I forgive my mom. And everybody says I go above and beyond what my mom and my dad ever, I could never talk to them again and it would be very understandable. I go above and beyond what most people are capable of with what I've been through with them. But my mom will still say things my mom will still say things that are abusive. So it's not ending. It's still, I'm still being abused. But because of all the work that I've done, I can let it come to me and drop and not take it in, but it's still there.
So do you think
I'm not abusing myself anymore with it. To as much as I can. I feel like I'm not abusing myself with it anymore. But it's still, if the phone rings or I get a text message, it's like, okay, what is this insanity going to be? It's not, and I can love her. And it's what made me a comedian because I switch it immediately. If I took in everything that she said, I wouldn't be here right now. I've got to change it quickly to something I can use to my benefit. I've done that since I was a child.
Does that sound like a reaction to you or a response?
It's a response.
But it sounds pretty automatic.
Well, I can't just do it. I have to. If I just reacted, it would be picking up the bait and fighting. I respond via being letting it go, letting it move into like Wonder Woman bouncing it back.
But so at some point it becomes a fight or a defense. If Wonder Woman is the metaphor, I would say she's somewhat of a gladiator.
Yeah. But I mean, over Christmas, so I really just let her say things and I just didn't respond at all, which was new. But we had the most fun when I took her things and made them funny.
So let's say, given that where we are right now is exactly where we all are, and she's only here to the degree that we're considering her, Gabe and I are considering her as a result of what we're hearing. So what we're thinking of her is a thought-based experience, and who she is to us is here now, and who she is to you is what you're thinking about now. So quick question is, do you see her with contempt or appreciation?
I see her with no feeling really at all.
So you're kind of numb to it.
Because, and it's interesting, it was really fun having my friend meet her, because he didn't believe a lot of the things. And then he met her and he was like, Jackie, you could be anybody. Like, she doesn't understand you whatsoever. She never will. Like, he was in shock over how, and he even said to her, like, he said, you know, thank you for having Jackie. She's helped me better than any therapist, anything ever. Like, she's remarkable. And my mother just like couldn't respond, couldn't say anything. And then another woman recently was like, the sober woman was like, said to her, if Jackie helped me so much when my husband died, her humor and everything, like, she's a godsend. Anyway, and my mother's just like has no response. It's so, but because of all the work I've done, it's just like, that's what it is. I'm in acceptance of it. Oh. But the fact of the matter is, when there's no denying that when she dies, I will have so much relief because I won't have to hear her nonsense anymore.
Well, and I would say that what you're struggling with is what you're making out of what's happening, not what she's doing. Because my experience is that when I allow people to be who they are and let what they're doing be what they're doing and not think of it in relation to how it impacts me, I begin to see that what I'm reacting to is what I'm doing, not what they're doing. I'm reacting with my own thoughts and my own rationale and my own understanding. And numbness, in my experience, is an indication of pain. It's not the absence of pain. It's like a frozen state, right? So an icicle, a person who's icy, is considered cold and distant and remote and removed. And that would be good descriptions of the idea that this thing that we've frozen is being placed somewhere else, on someone else, at some other time, from some other place that can't be touched or reached. So I'm just in this impossible situation. And the best thing I can do is become Wonder Woman to resist it. And my daughter has 2 stars on her shoulders because she is Wonder Woman. And she did that. She was a fighter. She grew up to be an attorney. Yeah. And she struggled as a child and had wounds to prove it and suffered trauma and probably has still not resolved it completely. The issue and the question is, if we're here now and everything that's happening, including wherever your mother is and wherever those instances are that are no longer happening, the lack of past and future is the acknowledgement that right now, the present is in fact a culmination of everything that's ever happened. And the only time that anything ever happens is in the present. So if there's any chance to do anything, it would be now. And it would be here. And it would be looking and seeing what you're doing with it, rather than having the sense of clarity you have about what she's doing, and starting to melt some of the ideas that you've used to help keep you from feeling the incredible suffering and pain that you obviously felt at 3 years old when you were so completely vulnerable that you had no real developed sense of defense and have been building those senses ever since to simply survive and to feel better and to simply have anything to give anybody that isn't spiteful and hateful. And what you do in comedy is exactly that. And very often that's very much what's born of comedy. The tragic and the happy face of theater is very much emblematic of the fact that the drama we create when it's relieved is funny, finally. And when we take these things so seriously as to imagine that something not happening is the problem for what is happening, we're taking seriously something that really doesn't exist at all except in our thinking. And this exercise, in my experience, and I explained to you guys, I had a severe panic attack when I started realizing that I thought the aim of life was managing these impulses and these fears and this discontent. And I thought being frozen to everything was the goal. And I thought drinking and men, that exemplified men being numb to it all and still willing to go forward like a Marine who's trained basically to kill people and not be afraid of dying. And those may be all great attributes for soldiers, but I don't think for humans, it really adds up. Because if anybody had my father was a captain of the Marine Corps, and he said they have teenagers do it because they don't ask the same questions a 25 or 30-year-old would ask. And so to subject ourselves to that same sort of theory over time is a killing off of our potential to actually see. My sense is I never see anybody with appreciation if I'm holding something against them and thinking they're doing something that's contemptible. Ever.
Well, when I talk to her higher self, and I love her higher self.
Yes.
And it's interesting because the last time I really did it, I kind of said goodbye to her higher self. I was like, I'm gonna have to. I forget what I said. But I did a letting go kind of thing. But I knew I would still see my mother in physical and love her higher self. But I did some kind of letting go. I don't know what I did, but the next day my mother texted me that she had quit drinking, which was unbelievable. But
you can see the impact, though, Jackie, of giving even a little bit. Let me suggest to you, there's no disconnecting from a higher self if that higher self is the essence of all that is. There's no disconnecting from it. There is no persona that she has that's independent from all others in that highest self. And it's one of the issues, because we all share this, when we see it incorrectly in others, what we're sharing is our own incorrectness. And I'm not suggesting what she did was right. I'm not suggesting it couldn't have been better. But I am suggesting that if you go back in time and think you can change it, it's impossible. And to imagine that somehow thinking about it in ways that it is no longer creates the impossibility. And what it is now is what it is. And your freedom, I don't see you as bound to this at all. I know that you're not. But I know that we all, including myself, struggle from thoughts that we're addicted to that give us the impression we're not even thinking what we're thinking. And as a result, the feelings we're having aren't even happening. And I would say that's cause for dis-ease and a sense of discomfort in a body that knows better than to make believe that what it's being asked to do in a sick way is the best thing it can do. And yet it abides and it follows our dictates. And those things undermine us in some sense. So to Gabe's sort of recognition last week is that if we can be so cocksure and still be at odds with somebody, there's a pretty good chance that we're doing something that we're desperate over to try to save what we think is ourselves from something that's hard to face. And again, when I sort of opened up some of that stuff, I had a panic attack where my whole body turned gray. I mean, I literally felt like I was being marched into the gas chamber at San Quentin. And, you know, when you're finally realizing that all you thought was working ain't working very well if you got to that point. And it really grabbed me in a way that I never expected, because I really thought the ultimate refinement of the defenses was the goal, rather than the beginning of seeing that to any degree, that I'm seeing the world as at fault in any way, I'm managing a thought about it that's incorrect. It isn't to say, hum a little more for me.
But how do you, How do you? So say my mother is saying something really hurtful to me. What do I do?
Well, it's only hurtful for you in relation to what you think she should be doing. If you started letting her do what she does and just let it be what she does, your reaction to it is your connection to it.
Right.
And I would say that some of the responses you've developed are ways to manage the reaction. And they're probably smarter ways than you made up when you were 3. Because you've had a little bit of time to do that now. But it doesn't mean they're working any better. It just means that they may be holding more and more and more of that deluge back. That's that quantity of resistance that your body's been holding that is reactive to other people, and that you find in your relationships, and you find in instances with other people that seem to be replications of this same discontent or the same irritability. It's not uncommon that we find the exact same things in other people that bother us, and then we think they're toxic, so we stay away from them, when in fact they're giving us a chance to see our own toxicity. Because we're kind of blind. Our thinking doesn't really see itself very well until we have a feeling and we take an action and we actually express it. Then it's like when you say something that you think is absurd to yourself out loud, it gives you a chance to actually witness whether in fact you're correct about feeling absurd. Because everybody else will let you know pretty quickly how that fits. And circumstances anything that's real will work. It'll be effective. It'll be productive. Anything that isn't.
Truth and love. Truth, love will work.
Well, I would say it's working right now. And we think that we are that if we're not expressing it, truth and love isn't working, because we think so addictively that it's all up to our thinking.
But yeah, so I would like to get a text from her and not be like, oh God.
Yeah. Well, listen, what I learned was when I started actually seeing that we all share the exact same thing, that if it's infinite, it isn't divisible. So there isn't something different. And where we share that, I don't know. I don't know if it's a soul. I don't know if it's, karma. I don't know any of that. I don't want to get into all the divisive ideas that keep people separate in their own little forts. My contention is, if it is, it is. And if it is, we share it. And if we share it, and what we're sharing appears to be something someone else doesn't have, it can't be true for me to think that. And if I do, I'm really causing the distinctions and the division that causes people to fight wars.
I think this is what I'm getting from it. So I'm able to give love to the higher self and her when she's not talking. But now I feel like I put up a boundary when she's talking to protect myself, but I can do that, but still give love. And I think I was stopping the love.
You can't give or take something that's indivisible.
Right.
The real concession is beginning to see that this loving source, this thing,
unconditionally loving her at all moments.
No.
Not just when it occurs.
You're already doing it. That love that we share is indivisible. It can't come and go because we are not expressing it thoughtfully. When we're thoughtless, it's still there between us.
Okay.
When we're thoughtful, it's still there between us. When we don't think it's there, it's still there between us. The only thing that happens is we start going off on these mental jags that give us a greater and greater impression that the idea that we're apart from it is true and real. And all of a sudden now we need to make up for it by being unconditionally. Think of unconditional love. Love is not conditioned. Why do humans need to rename it as unconditional when love is unconditional by its nature?
Right, that's so true.
Because our actions
we've been taught so much condition. We've been taught a lot of conditional love.
Culture is opinion. And opinions, because you talked about all your friends who agree with you. Getting consensus amongst people who didn't witness what you witnessed is a great way to make believe that what you're doing is what everybody else is doing. And in fact, it's true. We're all doing this on the same platform, but we put different faces, places, times, and events to it to claim it's us. It's ours. It's me. It's different. It's unique. This is rare. I understand surrender, but this circumstance is something different. And it's all ways that we use to condemn ourselves and are defensive and are denying. And denial is a form of the body's sense of freezing, literally frozen and numb. Numbness is evidence of pain. It's not an absence of pain. And to
Ooh.
go numb is to be desensitized. And for sentient beings, that is the opposite of what they're designed to do on a functional level.
Okay, thank you. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it.
Well, again, you're doing it.
Yeah.
The fact is that all the thoughts that say you're not are addicted to something that isn't true, because the only way a lie survives is by constant focus. It's the only thing that keeps it going. Lies do not exist in the universe. They don't exist in the animal kingdom. They don't exist in trees and nature. They exist only in thought. And humans seem to be the unique thing that we hold ourselves as being superior because we can think and we have freedom of choice, and then use it to condemn ourselves to feeling inferior in the nature and condemned by an infinite source. That is a sick interpretation.
Dogs don't get facelifts.
Yeah, exactly. And wrinkles in time, that we talk about, don't get plastic surgery. Right now, the universe is not afraid of its age.
Right.
It's not contemplating that. We contemplate ourselves and then wonder why we have anxiety. Because rather than expressing what we know, which is absolute and complete and whole in thoughtful ways, we get busy trying to think our ways into those things to try to make up for what we think we're deficient doing, when in fact, in our source, there's never been any deficiency and there's never been any need. And that's the ultimate source that we have isn't anything we can even talk about, but by reference and suggestion and proposal and consideration, because no amount of words is going to get us there if we're already there.
Where does the deficiency come from, Jack? Where does it originate? Right? In our own thoughts. Right?
Yes. It's the reaction to the reaction that gives us the impression that we become so consumed with the thought that because all of our attention, or seemingly all of our attention, is being paid to it, we think it's all that's going on, and then we begin to claim it's true and real. And the pain, what's interesting is, another little tidbit, we went over this last week at Sunday slightly, but if you look at the natural response to fear, to a threat in a body, is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? We went over that. And yet the anxious response is to fight, which is defiance and defense and denial. So what are we doing? Trying to put ourselves to sleep to what's happening. It isn't saving us, it's killing us. Or flight, which is a compulsion. Now I'm going to preoccupy myself in some compulsive activity and think because my attention isn't being paid to what's happening, it's no longer happening. Or freeze, which is to go numb and all of a sudden not have any feelings and not feel what's happening. And people who are born without the capacity of feeling generally do not live past their teens because they're unable to recognize when something is wrong. So that's obviously not in instinct's favor of survival. And fawn is that final element that's been added to those three natural things, is to people please and think that by being nice, we're going to keep someone else from being harmful. And that becomes enabling, which is the ultimate essence of addiction, when we think we're helping and all we're helping ourselves is to an idea we're helping, when what we're doing is helping others get worse. We are not helping them at all. We are helping ourselves to an idea that it's up to us to save them, while we're hurting and harming them by imagining they have no better guided system than us.
The solution to one of them, to fawning, is not needing to be needed.
Well, and it's beginning to recognize, think of a fawn. I think I mentioned last Sunday that we were in Arizona and we went out on, my sister lives on a golf course, and we went for a walk, and there was a mother and two fawns on the golf course. And everybody said, oh, they're so beautiful and look at them. And I said, but look at the mother. She is neurotic. She is looking, as she's eating, her eyes are panning and moving, and the kids aren't looking. The mother's doing all the looking, because there are mountain lions out there, and there are javelinas out there and other animals that would threaten them. And they know that they're prey to that. So she's on a constant vigilant alert. Now, I wouldn't say that's neurosis. I would say that's just an accurate assessment of a potential problem being in their midst. And so their attention isn't paid as to whether or not, is this a vacation and I should not be worried? Or, they're not thinking like humans think. They're just saying, here I am with what I have, and what my responsibility is to these two fawns is to pay attention. And it doesn't mean I can save them in all respects, but I'll do everything I can to help them escape whatever comes. And when we're operating on that other basis, we do exactly the opposite. We pretend nothing's happening until it gets so bad, and we finally say, oh, I guess that was a problem. I guess driving at 100 really isn't a good idea, and driving drunk isn't a good idea, and offering myself in ways that aren't complimentary and helpful to people and seeing them as needing my help, while in fact the money I gave, I remember giving a guy money in one of the first meetings. He was sleeping in the bushes outside the meeting hall and had leaves in his hair, and I gave him a $50 bill when I didn't have any money. And he went out for 3 weeks on crack. He took the money and went out. And I thought, well, that wasn't help.
But did he get the leaves out of his hair?
He was back with the leaves. So the point is that if our observatory thinking capacity begins to look, we will actually see what's going on in ways that we haven't bothered to concede or admit or accept, or whatever the terms are that we use for simply beginning to watch and look. And we've always been aware. We are aware, knowing beings, and so is your mother. And your mother is probably struggling, Jackie, with some of the same abuse and issues that she passed on to you in hopes that she could get rid of them in seemingly subconscious way, because we are so deceptive with what we do. We don't want to admit what we're doing, so we pretend we're not while we're doing exactly the thing we pretend we're not doing. And that's the sickness. And that has been a contagion in humanity since humanity has had this mental friction and contagion, is passing it on and thinking the best thing I can do is to pass it on. Think about the way we talk about the kids. The kids are our future. So what are we doing? Creating more debt and more contamination for them to pollute and clean up. We're trying to be responsible for our own presence. We're already absconding and saying, we've already given up. The kids are the only hope we have. And we keep passing that concept on to every successive generation, while we as adults have not been mature enough to be sweetened and ripened by that maturity. And bitterness seems to be a pretty common thing in older age.
Mm.
Not necessarily, but it's common. People get grumpy. They get curmudgeonly. I've had all those terms attached to me by my kids and others. But the point is that if we share something that is natural, it gets easier by simply beginning to concede that maybe I'm doing things I don't even think I'm doing and thinking things I don't think I'm thinking. And just begin to concede that this thing we call the subconscious is where I used to keep, and probably still do because I still have little reactive flurries at times, must be keeping ideas that I think are so true that I know are not true. In my essence, I know they're not true, that I think I need to keep them in the dark to hide them and keep them out of view because I'd be embarrassed to have light shined on them. And so what do? I operate on the basis of appearance. And what do I become? Concerned about what everybody else is thinking about me, rather than the thinking I'm actually doing. And those things aren't coincidental. They're consequential. They're natural. They happen automatically when we start making this shift, just like standing in a mirror automatically reflects exactly what's standing in that mirror, in exact proportion, except for one thing. There's no breath, there's no blood, there's no substance, there's nothing to it other than image. And that's exactly what we use in thought. When you were saying earlier about the freedom you've gotten, and obviously beginning to do less of what we do worse, immediately begins to provide benefits that could seem better than anything we could ever expect. And that may seem to be enough. Mm. And yet, if that lurking tendency is still lurking, it's almost like we have to keep expanding that bubble to stay ahead of that lurking awareness, because now we've learned that at least we can get a little better. And if we're a little better, that's obviously a lot better than worse. But if we keep just managing the bubble, we're really missing the point that the bubble is actually also an illusion. It's just a delusion of an idea about all the things we think are true. So we're just expanding. We're getting better about admitting things, but we're not quite admitting the ultimate thing, which is that everything is already in perfect order. And we are exactly where that perfect order is. And as expressions of that, when we feel out of order and do things out of order, it's an indication thinking has become an addictive tendency or reactive thinking has become our primary source. And it can't be, but to thinking it can be, because thinking is allowed to do anything it wants. Why? Because we're free. Because a loving source doesn't say, I love you so much that I'm going to put severe restrictions on how you behave. And the beauty is when the ultimate freedom is recognized in thought, the whole idea of freedom makes complete sense, that we were able to go wrong because we had a perfect mechanism to guide us in a direction that allows us to grow and begin to discover that the rightness has always been present. It's always been where we are. It doesn't go and it doesn't come. It doesn't operate in the same field of vision that our bodies do. It's a knowing sense that as beings we know and we share. And the only reason this connection seems to work between us is because we begin to acknowledge it, even though our acknowledgements often have different words and ideas and different glimpses and things like that. But that essence doesn't change ever. And if it's true for us, it's true for everything and everyone, not just everyone, but everything. Rocks, atoms, molecules, muons, the smallest things that have been discovered, seemingly discovered by humans that we call discoveries, when in fact they've been in the universe since pretty much the beginning of the universe. And we call them discoveries because we think it's up to us to actually uncover what's been operating here as long as it's been going on. I mean, 14 billion years isn't enough for us to just concede maybe it was happening before we arrived. We're discovering it now. All we're discovering is how to utilize it. And that utilization in our own experience is beginning to discover how our relationships can be contaminated in those lines when they're seen as what's happening by them, rather than seeing, wow, if I continue to think it's out of my control and I have absolutely nothing I can do about this, I am living in a world that's just going to keep going wherever it's going. And my impact on that world, to your point, Jackie, being the change you want to see in the world, is beginning to see that you're the essence of that being. And as you see it, all those other ideas and thoughts start to fall away because they've all been literally delusions. They're all just images dancing on a light that as soon as the light goes off, as soon as you take the spotlight off of them, they don't exist. They're not hidden in the dark. They didn't exist other than the projection we were given in imagination. And you said early on today, your imagination really began to soar when you began to not have the, as you began to release yourself from those preoccupations, all of a sudden our imagination is designed to consider the infinite. It's designed to consider the absolute. It's designed to consider things beyond the possibility for limited thinking. And if we do, the chances are we're going to act in ways that would have seemed impossible 10 minutes ago. And things will happen that we couldn't possibly predict, because the prediction would have all been based on what we were doing rather than what was actually possible, which is well beyond what we think.
And then the imagination gives us unlimited thinking and unlimited possibility.
Well, it starts to express how it's designed to function, how it's really the order of things. Think of trees. They don't sit around and debate what they are. So what do? Become as big as they can be with what they get. They get enough water, they grow. If they don't get enough water, they die. They just act perfectly according, in order to how they're designed to function. When we're functional, we start actually expressing things unexpectedly, because now we're not stuck for 2 years trying to decide what to do and finally thinking we decide. I mean, here's a contest for you, which is an easy challenge.
I won. I'm just kidding.
You did, by the way. Start to imagine something that you're going to do.
Okay.
And then as much as you can spend time on it, see that whatever happens will never be what you imagined.
Ah.
So we're always in the face of seeing that our imagination is limited in terms of what we think might be happening, while it can be unlimited in the present that is happening. And the point is, if we were only getting out of the future what we imagined, we would only be getting a limited amount of possibilities, rather than that unexpected future that does happen always. My sense is it's always different in some way, in some component, in some expectation. Because when I'm there, I'm now present to deal with what's happening, rather than something I thought was going to happen the way I thought it would happen, and think the world is better when all I get is what I think, when in fact, if that's all I ever got, that would be a pretty dismal life. And starting to see the expectation that what happens, if your expectation about what happens is to let what happens happen, you have a relationship to it that welcomes it and isn't stuck in the thoughts you have in relation to what shouldn't be happening and what would have happened and what they are doing that isn't making all that goes away, and your present ability is right there in the face of everyone else whose faces are absolutely there despite what they're thinking, and your own freedom in that regard will open the conversation in the direction of that, in directions that nobody could have calculated.
I love it.
So that's the being. We talk about wanting to be the change, but everything's already changing. So we apparently are already being the change that we're seeing. The problem is we're seeing change we don't like. So we think what we need to be is something different to make the change better, rather than begin to conceive, well, wait a minute.
Everything's perfect as it is.
If we're able to make such a fucking mess out of nature, then that's pretty elevated capacity of manifestation that we're capable of. And if we can do it in opposing nature, what would we do if we were actually aligned with nature in terms of starting to function as we're designed rather than as we think we should, and think we have to, and think we need to?
Right.
Gabe, you heard something I know we talked about earlier that I thought would be worth introducing to the conversation. I think you thought too.
Was that the witness part?
Yes.
Um,
and Osho, I think it was.
Yeah, I was just watching, listening as I worked to some of his talks. And what kind of relates to what you were just talking about is the gist of it was goal orientation, trying to reach goals, set goals, make goals, all at the cost of being present by trying to achieve something that is not yet here, or may never come, like you said, or comes in a different way. And that we can start being witnesses to our own being, and enjoy life. But in that sense, enjoying life means to also be sad and to be angry at times, to be fruitful, to be happy. All of these things are witnessing life as it happens in the moment, rather than setting goals and money and power and prestige and all of these things that you can't literally take with you, at the cost of being present and enjoying life. And I found it very similar to what we were talking about Sunday, but also just this whole course of discussion is about that witnessing, that self-awareness, that awareness outside of us. And to Jackie's points about her mother, I think we all have similar points about either parents or past traumas or whatever it is, that I have those too, and then letting go of those, and not carrying those into the present by my present thoughts is really the key to living, and to just enjoying my father now and my mother and all of the things that we do have. And then lastly, Jack, I think when I was trying to be a devil's advocate in that last discussion points we just had, I'm trying to think of what other people would say who might be listening to this of, well, if I'm going to be aware and let everything happen to me, others are just going to take advantage of me being aware and being nice and being open, that they're going to take more of mine as I offer it or give it or allow it to be taken. What do you say? What would you say to those people?
I think we're really adept at creating scenarios that help justify not letting go.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that if a couple of things, there's several things in what you just brought up, but I would suggest that if we've been half asleep to what's happening, we've been taking advantage for fucking years and we haven't even noticed it. Our depreciated capacity has been minimizing our own appreciation for our possibilities and our capacity. for years. And I am very reactive to when someone wants more from me than I want to give, or they take something I don't think they should have. I've always had that that's been a core issue that I realize is really my own recognition of my own idea that I need what other people have to fulfill me. I need to take it. I need to get it somehow in some deceptive manner rather than I already have it. And I grew up as a kid stealing things. I like to steal things. I like to get things from other people that didn't belong to me. And I like to feel that possession and that prowess and that capacity. And I didn't feel good about it, but I feel exhilarated in the process of it, which is sort of the intoxication of doing something wrong and the chemical fuel that comes off of that. And that intoxication, by the way, intoxication contains the word toxic. So toxic thoughts are a function of intoxication. It's this chemical inducement that there's an emergency and it's an adventure and I'm climbing a mountain, when really what I'm doing is something wrong that I know is wrong, that I'm still acting on, and I'm facing the consequence of that release of adrenaline, whatever else is released in my bodily system, my chemical factory. So one of the things about this idea of letting go, and Jackie, this goes right back to exactly what we were just talking about. And I just want to present this and just let it float. Because like all of these conceptions, if any of us are maintaining obsessive thoughts, new thoughts that challenge those thoughts are only going to help challenge, like trying to stretch the muscle too much and it reacts by not wanting to be stretched, or it reacts by tearing. Those thoughts are basically going to come up with new thoughts to try to react. And consideration gives us a chance. It's really an awakened meditation and contemplation. It's really beginning to, our awakened state of knowing is always awake. It's always present. It doesn't get tired because it doesn't rely on air. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't do any of those things. It's just an absolute state of awareness. Things, inanimate objects of the universe don't breathe like we do. Life forms breathe. So those things we're used to doing to sustain ourselves are not things that need to be done in that realm. They just are. And if what we're doing in that direction is preoccupying ourselves with thoughts that we know are wrong, and we're using the inducement of this chemical cocktail to justify it, and we're seeing what's wrong by basically making believe that what's happening is everything and everyone else, we're basically just creating more toxicity in our thinking that creates and undermines our ability. So the ability to come up with excuses not to do this, when in fact, if we were aware in thought to what was happening, we would recognize intuitively people's motives, and we could actually respond in ways that could diffuse those motives and actually help, rather than foster their corruptness, actually help draw them into a valuable interaction that would be something that would be unthinkable because we haven't been thinking about those things, typically.
For me, the fawning has been the primary, mode.
People pleasing.
Yes. If they're not mad at me, I won't be hurt by them. That's like my last 30 years.
But you can see how what they're doing basically gives you cover for what you're doing, and what you're really mad at is what you're doing, and using them now as voters to try to democratically elect yourself as being absent to what's happening.
Yeah, but I mailed in a lot of my own votes.
Exactly. No, you're the best proxy they have. You're using them, and they don't even know they're voting for you.
Yeah, but I always got the votes I wanted. That's for sure.
So it's very deceptive.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about something that humans have struggled with, and we're talking about it in a way that actually begins to bring it into a conversation where we can look at it, there's a very good chance we don't have a lot of experience to apply to this. And a lack of experience would be what the present moment is filled of: spontaneity, synchronicity, absolute everything possible is possible. And that would be intuition. That would be a knowledge well beyond the concept of intuition that is developed through experience. It would be a knowing that you know without any doubt. It wouldn't be a knowing because I've done it 1,000 times and you think it's going to happen the 1001st, and it doesn't. That's like somebody who's playing blackjack thinking, I've gotten 32 hands blackjack in a row, it's going to go on forever. Chances are that it's gone that long, the odds are trillions against one.
Mhm.
The chances that it's going to go on are even slimmer, and to use that fact that it hasn't gotten as bad as it can to justify continuing is exactly what addiction does. So to any degree we're doing that, we're continuing to maintain the web of that going on and the conspiracy with everybody else. We become the conspirators, thinking we're not, by coming up with new ways to think it's exclusive to us, rather than see that we're just remapping the whole conspiracy and acting like we're on the fringe rather than in the dead center. That's all.
Yeah, part of me was really mad when I got sober that I couldn't let it get as bad as other people had gotten. Like I would watch intervention and be like, nobody would help me. Like everybody wants me to keep drinking. Like I
remember hearing a friend speak, and he said that his father, who worked for or represented the sheriff's department, got so tired of him that his father moved out of the house, the family house, when he was 14 and got his own apartment. He didn't. And I thought, man, I never accomplished that. I had my Marine Corps father in tears at 14, but that idea I seem to be ashamed for the story. So, and for anyone listening who doesn't think that's that funny, the fact that the bubble has been popped in relation to these things we've done, because we know now what they really were and the sickness that was involved in having those things happen. There's a freedom to that is essentially what humor is about and what comedy is about, is popping those bubbles and being able to see them from another vantage point that includes an awareness of how wrong it was, and also an awareness of how absolutely ridiculous it was and how silly it was, while it was cloaked in being so important and imperative that life depended on it. And to that point, Gabe, to your issue about creating goals, in the same vein that we discussed about beginning to see that if our expectation is to let what happens, the possibility, if you decide you want to make $1 million, so you decide you want to travel somewhere, right? But you decide how you want to get there only is going to happen the way you think it's going to happen. That's the interference that causes the suffering and the pain and the agony. It isn't going to that place. If you decide you're going to get there and go as able, and go where you're taken, and go as things allow you to go, you're starting to admit that the interactive capacity of getting there is going to be an interactive capacity like the one you're immediately in, because as you go there, you will also be in the present moment where all things are possible, and any potential change or adjustment that can be made is probably better made when you're in the face of the intersection you're standing in, rather than 2 weeks before trying to imagine the streets and the layout and the approach, right? So it's the beginning of seeing that if our present state is always present, goals are easy to attain when we're not conflicted over how to get there. And by the time, why so many people get to what they finally want and find it empty is because they beat everything up along the way to finally get there, and are now reckoning with a new present filled with a seeming past they regret and resent and are upset over. And wonder why the present doesn't feel satisfied, because getting there became a brutal attempt of reactive, abusive behavior, rather than one that simply said, I'm at sea. If the wind blows, I'm probably going to be blown in the direction of the wind. And if I leave the sail up, that will probably be more true or accurate than it would be if I took the sail down. And if the currents are the currents and I know what they are, but yet they vary and I don't adjust to them, the chance of my getting into port are impossible. And we are on land and at sea, navigating events and circumstances that are just like the currents and just like the wind and just like all the conditions of a sailor at sea. We're constantly adjusting. And when you're driving, look at you're never in the center of the lane, except from when you're passing to the right side of the lane to the left side of the lane. You're always veering. You stay in the lane, but there's latitude for you to move. You're never dead center of the lane. And if you thought you had to be, you'd be crazy by the time before you got to where you were going and missed the fact that somebody stopped in front of you and run into them. So those things that happen like that are not accidents. They're really not accidents. They're perfect consequences for this preoccupation of thought, thinking that what isn't happening is all that's happening, and what is happening isn't happening. And that form of denial keeps us thinking everything becomes an accident. It's funny that accidents never seem to be getting what we want. Nobody ever says, you know what, somehow it worked in my favor, it was a complete accident. They always have to do with what we don't want to accept we were responsible for. And if the nature of existence is responsible for existence, we are responsible as a function of that nature, automatically, always, now, not even forever, because forever never comes. Now, presently is what forever ultimately is in the present, not in some other time, not in some distant future. That future is the same thing we use the past to excuse. So the past and future are really never anything more than we make of them in thought, at all, ever. There is no place that they're stored except in our memory. And where does our memory occur? In the present. And what do we think of? Images. And are those images complete and whole for the experience? No, they're topical and superficial, just like we see each other. We see each other as forms. We see each other as superficial. And yet the infinite source is both superficial and substantive. It's always available. It isn't deep and it isn't distant, because it isn't in a function of space or time. It's always available and it's always everything. Very different than the way we operate in the seeming world that we're in. But that substance for each of us still exists regardless of whether we can see it. So post-traumatic stress, in my estimation, is a present traumatic maintenance of ideas that aren't happening. And there's probably no greater trauma than we can impose on our body than to think that we can make up reality and truth in a present when reality and truth is evident in all that's present. There's almost no other way we can conflict and collide in a way that thinking knows better and the body knows better and we know better while we're absolutely addicted to the thought we don't. And it only ever happens in the present. So where is healing? In the present. What we do now is the possibility, always, wherever we are bemoaning what isn't happening, what we are bemoaning is the thought about what isn't happening. It isn't the content of what we're thinking about, it's the thought we're using to bemoan it that we bemoan. When we're in doubt, we're doubting what we're thinking. If we give credit where it is due, we will see that our bodies have been perfectly designed to announce to us what we're actually doing. And the gut feelings we have are accurate assessments. While what we are thinking may be insane, the gut feelings are accurate assessments of that insanity, knowing what's wrong, knowing that we're doing something or up to something that isn't right. We have that sensation. If we run from the feeling, we're promoting the thinking that's causing the feeling.
What you resist persists.
Exactly.
We're promoting it.
Well, and the interesting thing is the only thing what resistance is not having things as they are. So if I see things according to how I think they are, what I'm seeing is what I think, not what's there. And if I don't see what's there, I don't have things at all. So this is getting to the point. The letting go is seeing that we've never held on to anything, but a constant repetition of a thought that we've been holding on. And that's only ever happened in the present. Addiction believes in all of these other lies we tell about the past and the future and all these other locations and truth being deep and seeing is believing. You know, again, think about that. Seeing is believing. If all we see is all that's believable, how thin is belief to be relied on at all?
I've always thought believing is seeing.
But think about it. If all we see is limited, and
of that, what I believe I'll see.
Oh, well, here the question is: if seeing is believing, then it suggests everything unseen is unbelievable. And clearly, we know there are people in other cities that we don't see right now that are apparently there. And there are other parts of the world we've never seen that are apparently there.
I actually did DMT once before I got sober. But I did it with like a shaman. I did it with this guy named Shane Moss, and he is kind of like a professional, and I don't know, but he does comedy tours. Like he'll go on tour and do comedy at a comedy club, but then on the side do a psychedelic tour, and you know he does DMT with people. So it was like a whole kind of shaman type situation. But when I came out of it, it's only 6 minutes long. And when I came out of it, I wouldn't do it now that I'm sober because I don't need to, because actually the breath work does the same thing for me. But when I came out of it, everybody wanted to talk to me, and I was like, I need to go write for a minute. So I went and wrote over and over, inside out, inside out, inside out. Because what had come to me was very clear that it's wrong to base my feelings or whatever on what I see. That to come from the inside and yeah, I just wrote it over and over and over again.
Well, I would propose that what we're feeling is accurate, and to change the feeling is to reinforce the inaccurate thought that it's reflecting.
Right.
And addiction, if you think about it, is treating the feeling, the symptom. What does the addict do? Whatever his symptom is, more and more and more and more and more, which is never enough. So if more is never enough, then enough will never be enough. And what do people say? Enough is enough. And yet, it never seems to be. So again, we sort of betray this in words. We're talking about it openly and not actually looking at the connotation.
That would be funny anytime somebody says enough is enough, just saying, and yet it never seems to be.
So if what we're struggling with is delusion, it really suggests that we're not struggling with anything other than what we're doing now. And simplifying it all to that takes away this whole process of thinking we've got to go back into our past and dredge up things that aren't happening, which is a denial that the present is a sum total of everything that's ever happened. And the present is also the sum total of all possibilities of everything that can happen simultaneously. So if everything we're bemoaning because of something that is no longer happening, we're going to think of a future that is limited to the same pain and peril of those things we're thinking about, and wonder why we feel doomed because we're not wanting to be responsible and act responsibly. So we're acting irresponsibly and immediately going to blame it on a future that will never come anyhow. Future is always the present when it comes. And the irony of this is we will manifest a future to mimic those thoughts, to claim that it was the future, again, responsible. And the people, places, and things we find in that future in the condition we say is unacceptable to justify having continued to maintain those thoughts. That's the sickness in a nutshell. And if that's the case, what we have today, in all the ways we might look at the world and see the deficiencies and the horrors and the sicknesses, are actually perfect manifestations of exactly the thinking we've been doing. That isn't natural, but it's possible, simply possible for us. And the possibility of this thinking doesn't go away when we start seeing it, but starting to see that the possibility is always possible is the freedom not to choose it, and start seeing that we've never been condemned to it, except to the stories we've developed and cultures we've developed around these ideas that we think are so true that we're condemned to the truth of them, when in fact truth can't condemn anything and never has.
So we can't blame our mothers.
We can. That's the freedom though, Jackie, is saying,
right.
If I can drink as equally as I cannot drink, I have a clear choice. If I think I can never drink, I think the possibility of drinking is impossible, and that's a lie. And the torture of maintaining that, what's it going to do? Have me drink. And that's exactly how I continued to drink for years when I knew I had a problem, and smoke pot for years after I knew I had a problem, thinking I had to fight it. I had to stop it at all costs. Those days felt like years trying to stop, because every moment all I wanted to do was break the promise of the thought, which was to do the thing I claimed I couldn't do. When all along, I could absolutely do it, and I kept proving it over and over again, thinking it shouldn't have been done if I hadn't done it, all the blame and the shame and the regret, rather than saying, no, it's always been possible. And when I finally conceded that, within a week, I thought, this is no way to live. And I stopped. It all became clear, what I had heard in meetings and all that stuff just crystallized. And it was largely because of this sense of neutrality. Our present state is neutral. We're in neutral. We're not in overdrive. Mental obsession is in overdrive. It's in reverse and overdrive.
I really love that.
And generally, reverse and overdrive are on the old stick shifts. Were between, neutral was between the two.
I love that, crystallizing good thoughts and evaporating bad ones. Not naming them bad, you know what I'm saying.
They naturally, listen.
Unuseful, not useful.
Yeah, exactly. They're not useful. And here's the difference, and it's something I wrote in the intro to Sunday's discussion, is that what's wrong isn't inherently wrong until we think it's right. And why we know it's wrong, and so that becomes the lie. What's wrong is something that can't be applied to our world. Just doesn't function, doesn't work. It's dysfunctional. That's what's wrong. So if we're trying to fix a 1/2-inch bolt on a car with a 1-inch wrench, it's not going to work. We can try it forever. We can think it will, and we can keep trying, and we can keep trying, and we can keep trying. But most people in the world, when it comes to mechanics, would say, you know what, I need a different wrench. When it comes to thinking, we don't seem to do that. Because we think, Gabe, and you said it, that it's some interior thing going on that's invisible to the world. And that we get so ashamed about what we're thinking, we think we can keep it to ourselves. And in fact, it's bleeding, blood, sweat, and tears are the seeming secret is secreting itself through the anxiety and the blood, sweat, and tears that we suffer and create in this world and see regularly. This isn't to say that there aren't natural disasters and things that kill people and all that, but they're natural and there's nothing we can do to prevent them. But if what we've done is actually change the atmosphere to begin to create more of those disasters, then that's something we were capable of doing. It's absolutely something we're capable of undoing. And I'm not suggesting, again, for the sake of argument or not arguing, that that's our cause. Some people believe humans have absolutely nothing to do with it. I would say it's kind of hard to be here, 7.5 billion people, and have absolutely no impact. But maybe that's the case. Maybe we have no impact and nature is just doing what nature does. But I would say I take advantage of nature daily because I eat it and I breathe it and I fill it with whatever exhaust my car uses. And I do things that cause obvious toxins to be released. And I do it in my thinking. And so I do it in my actions.
And you're tooting.
You mean beeping or horning?
Wait, isn't the La Brea tar pits, even though the La Brea means tar pits, so it's really tar pits, but isn't the tar pits the earth tooting?
Well, I think it's a combination of the molten, whatever oil was made of is part of that. It's all oil. But there's a molten core where rock melts in the dead center of our, what we think is solid and impenetrable is literally like volcanic, what do they call it? Magma, lava, which is the center of our Earth.
But is it methane that comes out?
I don't know. Yeah, there is methane that's natural, yeah.
It's all natural, isn't it?
Well, I think plastic isn't natural. That was a man-made thing. Lasers are man-made. They didn't exist. Those are things we've constructed and made. nuclear energy obviously is common throughout the world. It wasn't really common within our atmosphere until we developed it. And now we don't know how to store, we're happy for the benefits and not so responsible for the consequences. And so we've got fields of nuclear waste that we don't know how to contain, literally.
Yep. Sounds like our thinking.
Exactly.
Oh,
It's that same toxic radioactive waste. It's the same
where
exact
do
thing.
we put it?
Yes, we're giving ourselves perspective in what we do on our thinking. So we're coming near the end of our, wait a minute. No, we got about 10 minutes before we started at what, 11:15? We got
Yeah.
1:15. So we've got about 30 minutes. But in the overview, I'll tell you something that I found very interesting. Now we've had Alyssa Sturgis and I, and then you and Gabe in the second conversation. I think I pointed this out earlier on, but if not, I'm going to repeat it. All the conversations led from sort of everybody's individuation of ideas to a more collective awareness of something that could be done on a more inclusive basis. Like the end of last week, the ideas about how do we carry this? How do we talk about this openly? How do we see more in others? How do we walk the walk, practice peace? How do we be that? Well, if we already are, one suggestion would be not continuing doing what we've typically done. If we already are, it would be a lot easier if we, this process isn't a new beginning of coming up with some new egotistical trait that's better than the old one. It's the beginning of seeing that undoing what is literally transparent is beginning to see through it and see that there's nothing more there than we make of it when we think it's impenetrable and dense and unable to be moved. We're designed to move. We're designed to be moving. And to live in a world where we're not doing that is to live in a degree of regret and resentment for not doing that. Because we know better, and we know that our capacity has been diminished by whatever it is we're doing that is contrary to what we're designed to do and capable of doing. And we wear that weight. We bear that burden. We feel that in depressing, anxious, stressful modes. We create dis-ease. And I'm not making a medical analysis, but simply suggesting that when we undermine our ability to function, we're undermining the body's ability to do what it's designed to do, which is to maintain balance rather than be thrown out of balance and be susceptible to things that it would normally be easily adaptable to and to overcome. And to undermine ourselves with stress is one of the greatest things, if not the only thing, that we can control, that we have the impact on, that we make the choice to do. And to do that in the name of survival is insane and sick.
It's to think before you think.
Well, I would say we already know better. And knowing isn't thinking. This sense of knowing is just an absolute sense of peace and awareness and fulfillment and bliss and wholeness. And all of the things we might talk about striving for and getting are all the things we already have. and the striving to get them is the claim we don't. So the ultimate striving and the undoing is beginning to see that much of what we do is exactly, if you think of what you're doing and trying to get somewhere, it is also the claim that you aren't where you are. And if we are where we are and disclaim it, that might be a good starting point to begin to disband the ideas and the rumors we spread and the gossip we spread in our head about why we're not where we are and shouldn't be here and should have more and should have this, should have that, when actually, if we have everything here now, not thinking we do is the only thing that creates the deficiency, to your point earlier, Gabe. It's that thinking that creates the deficiency that gives us the impression that all we need is more, when more is never enough because we're really not addressing the issue.
So instead of proselytizing, shall we just be as we are?
Because that would be needing to be needed, Prof. Yeah.
Well, again, it's not a behavioral modification, but a simple reckoning.
And it's the intention of it.
Well, in your meditative state, my sense is we intend to do everything we do. We just don't want to claim it because we don't like the consequences because they don't live up to the appearance we're trying to create.
But if I'm saying something because I want to be needed, it's different than if I say it because it's something I want to share.
If you say you want to be needed and are willing to admit you want to be needed, there's really no friction there. You can be wanted by people. You can be needed by people.
But not needing to be needed.
The point is that none of it is wrong until we make believe it's true or real and something we can't do. So if we can do it, it's a possibility. And we're free to choose it. And as soon as we don't think we're free to choose it, we think we can't do it. That actually creates the needing to do it within the confines of the thought that's resisting what we're capable of doing.
Right.
So
I was in a throuple for a little while, and my friend was like, Jackie, you can't do that. And I'm like, I'm doing it. How can you say I can't?
It's like people say occasionally, and I've heard it many times, they say, you can't say that to me. And I said, how is that possible? I just did. Isn't it odd that you would tell me that I can't do what I'm doing? I said, does that make some of the point I'm trying to make, maybe? Because we talk in terms that are very much protective and have this presumptive nature to presume that, somebody said to me, that guy's really rude. And I said, think about what makes him rude. And he said, well, he does this, he does that. And I said, so to you, those things are unacceptable? He said, yes. And I said, so who's rude? Who's rude? Think about the source of how those contentions come. They don't come because we're not thinking about them. They come as a result of our thinking. And certainly people can be rude, but it has no impact if you're not prone to defending the impact you're having. So the sense of being is a sense of knowing and a sense of seeing it and actually beginning to conceive this. This is really what awakened meditation is and awakened contemplation. Is beginning to introduce thought in a proactive direction of beginning to see that if everybody already has this, I don't need to tell them anything at all, ever. But if I want to participate at a level where I'm giving all that I've been given, speaking in terms that would be more accurate to what's happening would probably be the most productive thing I could do, and maybe a good reminder to people of what they already know, rather than a telling of them what they should think, how they should think, where they should go, what they should do, and who they are if they were finally realized in some way that depends on my speech and my telling them. It doesn't depend on me at all. I'm a bystander to this, like we all are. But being a bystander means I don't have to take a position as an individual against anything or anyone. I can be, like everyone, part of the crowd. And see that if that's actually the case, you're going to see a lot of resistance to the thoughts that is the case. You're going to see all of the thoughts that are reactive in you start to rear up and start to try to defend themselves. And that undoing is the beginning of saying, oh, if lies depend on defense, then all I'm doing here is defending a lie by maintaining the thought. And if you can see anything accurately, the impact of it disappears, because the fact is we are free to take or leave whatever we want at any time. And freedom comes with taking and leaving for humans, not just taking and then being stuck and not being able to let go. That is not freedom. That's how humans seem to condemn themselves to claim that they are the superior source in the universe, rather than freedom and peace, choice, responsibility, and freedom are natural.
There's a line in that song that I love. It's, I am the innocent bystander, somehow I got stuck. That's from that song, Lawyers, Guns, and Money. But it's so funny, because if you're the innocent bystander, you know, somehow I got stuck. You're not really the innocent bystander.
Well, and keep in mind, we hold ourselves guilty. We can do whatever we want. The only reason we feel guilty, and think about feeling, is guilty was never an emotion until the 20th or 21st century, or 19th or 20th century.
And shame, same.
Shame is the same thing. When
Right.
we know what we're doing, we're guilty, period. And to feel guilty and think that we're not is to think that we're not doing what we're doing. And there again, you get into this whole thing of trying to pretend that irresponsibility is even possible, when in fact we can act irresponsibly and we can feel things that are irresponsible because we're thinking irresponsible thoughts. It doesn't make us irresponsible. It still has us aware that we are guilty for attempting to be irresponsible. We are guilty for the act, exactly like in a court of law. We are guilty because we're doing the thing that's causing the sense of guilt. And we call it a feeling when in fact all we're feeling is the guilt of our awareness that we're actually doing something and trying to avoid responsibility for it. So we're going to wrap up. If I remember the time right, we're probably at about an hour and 35 minutes. And last time we went 2 hours because of my manic rant, and I didn't even notice. But it is some indication of how time warps a little bit and how it can be, the experience of time can be very, very different in the face of considering things that are accurate and applicable versus perpetuating ideas that are not true in the name of some hysterical need.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
I read yesterday that it is not possible to feel complete and be successful unless you are rich.
Well, we are rich. If we have everything there is, and everything that there is right now, how much more could we have?
Right, because we have what we need when we need it.
Well, and the fact is, earning money is a functional capacity of productive actions. And if we're thinking dysfunctionally, the fact that we even earn a living is fucking exceptional.
Oh, wow.
You know?
Yeah.
So imagine that the
I'm already alive.
Money is a reflection of productivity. That's all that it is. And when you're valuable and invaluable, you will be given money from places you can't even imagine appreciated what you did, thankfully and happily. It won't be a fight for it. But we come from a sense of scarcity because the thinking we're using is scarce, and we know it. And so we create and manifest situations to confirm it so we can blame the situations and the problems rather than accept the nature of our own thinking. So this contemplation, my experience, in a discussion becomes much more obvious when you begin to realize that humans are doing this together. It's not something we're doing apart. It's not something we're doing alone. If we're doing it alone, we're just thinking we're alone because we've isolated the concept of thinking. And if what we're thinking about all the time is what's wrong, we're bound to feel pretty wrong and pretty bad. And the longer we do that, the longer we will create that experience rather than beginning to diffuse it just in the openness of a conversation, even in listening. Listening is a greater component, or as great a component as talking and being heard. If there was nobody listening, there would be no point to talking at all. Communication is two ways. Like all things in this relative universe, both those directions that seem opposite are exactly the same thing, bound together by common ground. They aren't one or the other. Good isn't based on anything other than bad. Bad isn't based on anything other than good.
I hate to be my mother again, but
I don't think you do.
But if nobody's listening, that's something I would love to tell her. I'm kidding. It's a joke.
No, that's pretty good. Well, you guys, I really appreciate this, as you know, and I don't, I can't repeat it as much as it is accurate for me. But want you to know in any way you're interested and willing to hear how much this means and how valuable the time we get to spend together is. And as this goes forward, maybe we'll do it again. Maybe there's ideas you have to help offer insight to people who may be struggling with something that you think is either unique or worthy of specific attention, and you can draw my attention to that. Maybe we can develop something on those lines. And I also welcome, as we have now on the podcast website, anyone who's listening to either contact us or offer direction or suggestions so that it can give us the breadth of your inclusion in what we're doing. While we already have your ears and have you, any thoughtful consideration or thoughtless consideration is worthy of our consideration. We'd be happy to do that and see where we can take it and go with it. And if it can be helpful, we're interested. Thrashing through some of the unhelpful bushes are part of this process. So whatever we can do, we're here. Thank you, guys. I love you.
Love you too. Thank you. This has been great. Thanks,
Thanks,
Gabe.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Jackie. Thank you.
Love
See
you
back
guys.
around campus.
Love you, Earth Angels.